ecosystem and has helped shape it over the years. Prior to his current role at Sequoia Capital, he was the VP of Google India and Southeast Asia, and a key role in expanding the region's internet ecosystem while accelerating Google's innovation and growth in the region. Currently, as part of the leadership team at Sequoia Capital, Rajan is helping engineer rapid early progress for startups by enabling disproportionate access to capital, talent, network, and decades of company building knowledge. We are delighted to have Rajan with us on the eve of the ETPrime Women Leadership Awards 2020. Welcome, Rajan.
Thank you, Prukalpa. It's great to see you again, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you to the entire ETPrime team for inviting me.
Awesome. So let's dive right in, Rajan. So I wanted to start out with, in this last 7 years that I've known you, you are probably one of the biggest champions of women entrepreneurs in India, be it in your own portfolio as an angel investor or now with Surge. I wanted to start by asking you, why is encouraging women entrepreneurship important to you personally?
Yeah, so I think, women entrepreneurship is really a subset, right, of diversity, in general, right? So I am a very strong believer in diversity because, throughout my life, I've benefited from it. I've grown up surrounded by, very independent, very strong, very powerful women, right? So my mom, when I was sort of a teenager, very early, my father unfortunately passed away. He was an entrepreneur, so she took over the business, and then made the business literally 10x better. While my dad was alive, we all thought the business was doing pretty well, but it wasn't doing as well as it was. And then she took it over, and I saw her sort of toil away at making that company better. And this was a long time ago, right? Where it was very difficult for a woman to be running a company. And then I met Radhika when I was 17, who I'm married to now. Been married to her for a long time, and she's an entrepreneur. She used to be an economist. After we graduated, became an economist. Worked in hedge funds and has been an entrepreneur for the last couple of years, many years now. And I've been, and then almost all my close friends are entrepreneurs. So I would say, so I've always believed that diversity is very, very important because when you're surrounded by women who are extraordinary, you begin to understand why how powerful it can be, right? And so that's sort of the first big thing. I think women entrepreneurship, as I said, look, I saw my mom go through what she did. I think at the time there was no such thing as angel investors or venture capital or any of that. I think she had to work really hard just to get financing from wherever she could. And I remember once I started angel investing, which was also a long time ago, she would often say, I wish, there was all this stuff that you guys are doing now. I wish it existed when I was, when she was building her company, right? So I think that's really where it comes from. And obviously I have a strong passion for startups, for entrepreneurship. And as I think about entrepreneurship, right? I mean, I think having women founders, build companies is super, super important because, we've seen this in every other, whether it's politics, whether it's business, whether it's academia, whether it's social activism. We've seen that, women, when given the opportunity, actually do extraordinarily well. And many of them do so much better than men, right? And I think I always felt that that would also be true in entrepreneurship. So it's a very personal thing for me, and I'm delighted that I think we've started the journey in India, actually globally. If you look at women in tech, I think it's still very early in the journey. But I think as we are making progress, and it'll take time. Nothing gets solved overnight, and this I think will take time. But I think I'm confident that we are taking steps in the right direction.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's something I've noticed is that actually almost everyone who believes in things like women entrepreneurs, a lot of those stories are actually from very personal sort of journeys, like seeing your mom. Like for me, it was actually seeing my mom growing up as an entrepreneur, some of those pieces, and it's the same for Varun, my co-founder, as well. So we've So shifting gears a little bit and moving to your, I guess, your investor hat. As you evaluate founding teams, do you evaluate women and male-led startups any differently?
No, we don't, right? At the end of the day, so I'll talk about Surge, which is where I spend all my time these days, right? Sequoia's early stage seed stage program that we have. Look, we fundamentally look for awesome founding teams, right? Going after very large markets, and that's really what we look for at seed stage, right? And we don't use any different criteria, whether it's men or women, right? And I think what's encouraging, and the reason I say that we are making progress is if you look at the last cohort of Surge, which you were a part of, right? We had 15 startups in our cohort between India and Southeast Asia. 5 of our startups actually have women co-founders, and almost all of them actually, well, 3 out of the 5. So basically, 5 out of 15 startups have women co-founders, and 3 of those companies, the CEOs, not just the co-founder, but the CEO is a woman, right? Like, so whether you look at yourself or Tamanna at Conversite, or Nelly, who's a single founder of Tiger Hall, or Sonal, who's the co-founder and head of business at Fitter, and then we have one stealth company, as you know, that we don't talk about, where again one of the co-founders is this extraordinary woman, right? And by the way, those 5 companies were not picked because they had women co-founders, or it was because that founding team was incredible, right? And also we felt that they were going after a large market opportunity. So I would say we don't look at this differently, but I think what we're seeing now is that we are seeing more. We'd like to see many more, by the way, right? I'd love for this number instead of 5 out of 15 to be 7 or 8 out of 15. And I think over time we'll get there, right? So, I mean, at a minimum, right? And ideally, you want 80% of these companies to have women co-founders. So, long answer to your question, it's not. We don't, because at the end of the day, I think that would not be right, because we want to look for extraordinary founding teams. So you have Nelly, who's a single founder of Tiger Hall. You and Varun, who are co-founders of Atlan. JC, Sonal, and the other co-founders at Fitter. That's really what you're looking for, right? Is sort of extraordinary founding teams going after very large markets.
Got it. And then going on from there, and I know I think in the past decade, you've seen the journey of a bunch of women-led startups. As both an investor, a promoter of the startup ecosystem, are there challenges that you feel that women entrepreneurs deal with that their male entrepreneurs today don't face?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, right? And I think it's, I'll again go back to a personal story. So my wife Radhika is an entrepreneur, and what's very interesting is Maya, who's 14, is also an entrepreneur. This summer she couldn't go to summer school, so she launched a company. It's quite amazing. I think somebody asked her like a few months ago, saying, "Do you want to be like your mom or dad?" And she's like, "Wow, what kind of question is that, right? I want to be like mom, and I want to be an entrepreneur, right?" So what's interesting is, I'll tell you why it's hard, right? And so, if you look at Radhika, right? Radhika runs her own business, and through COVID, they had to pivot from 70% offline to 100% online. So she has to manage that team, build the business, transition that through. She effectively sort of runs the home. She effectively spends more time with Maya, worrying about Maya's academics and so on. Radhika's parents now live in Delhi as well, so she's there for them. She goes and visits them every day. They live right around the corner, so fortunately for us, and she has to sort of do all of that, right? And then what does Rajan do? Radhika's husband. Rajan gets up at 6:30, does yoga, gets on Zoom calls at 8. And then basically listens to founder pitches, then gives founders thoughts on what they should do with their businesses, attends IC committee meetings, all this on Zoom, goes down, grabs lunch, comes back and does Zoom again. And basically till 10 p.m. at night, does Zoom. And then I basically watch Netflix with Radhika, which is our time together, right? Now, which one of those 2 roles do you think is harder, right? And if you look at sort of male founders in many ways, right? And it's unfortunate that it's that way, but obviously that should change over time. So, I think women women just do more, right? And I think whether you're a woman, founder, or whether you're and obviously as you get older, right, as you have a family and your parents start aging, etc. And I think that's sort of the way it is. And what amazes me is how women are able to do more. I mean, women fundamentally just do more, right? And I think that's where, as an ecosystem, we need to figure out how to support women better. Because the reality is, if you have to, so look at Radhika, right? She has to do all these different things, and I pretty much only do one thing. So if you do have to do so many things, you have to actually have much more leverage, right? Meaning, like, for instance, you can't spend as much time, for instance, networking, right? You can't spend as much time getting access to whether it's networks, capital, talent, etc. Right? So can you really streamline things? Because women tend to, I look at, whether it's you or Sairi, who runs Shiro's, or Suchita at Little Black Book, right? I actually think women founders are just much more efficient, right? Because you have to be, because you just have to be more decisive, more organized, more structured. You can't wander off into Never Land, doing sort of things. So long answer to your question, Prukalpa, but I do think it's different, and I think it gets more and more different as sort of you progress through both the life journey, as well as the company as a company journey, right? So whether it's Radhika, who built Shop Clues, right? I'm always amazed, right? She has 2 kids who go to the American Embassy School, where we see her, she's running this giant company, but she'd show up for parent-teacher meetings, right? And here was Rajan, who was at Google, who was stuck in Indonesia making up, it's amazing, right? It's amazing. So I think I really do believe that it's different, and as a result, it's much harder, right? And so having we can talk about what it would take, right, to be successful as an entrepreneur, but I think it's different.
Yeah. And I think that brings me again slightly back to your investor hat, right? And as an investor, you don't just invest, you also support your entrepreneurs through their journeys. So how much do you think, because at the end of the day, many of these decisions are profit-driven decisions. There's capital, like you need to return to your LPs, there's all of that. So then how do matters of things like equal opportunity and empowerment actually influence those decisions for you, both investment decisions as well as how you support your entrepreneurs through their journeys?
Yeah, so I think those are separate, right? So at the end of the day, as a venture capital firm, right, you have to return capital to LPs, right? And if you want to be a successful venture capital firm, you have to have extraordinary returns. So there shouldn't be any doubt that as venture capital firms, right, we have to make sure we are, partnering with the absolute best founders who are going after the largest markets, right? So there's no real, again, as I said, right, I think it's important that, at least my view is, it's important that we don't sort of differentiate between, let's say, 2 teams, that one has 3 male co-founders, and another one has, let's say, a single woman co-founder, right? In many cases, a single woman co-founder is, if we believe that team or she is better as a founding single founder than let's say the 3 male co-founders, then you bet on that. So I think it has to be about this question of which one is the better team, and which one do we think is going after a larger market opportunity, right? I think when it comes to your second question of support, look, at the end of the day, it's about just being aware, right, of what I just said. So for instance, if let's say one of the co-founders is, has a family and so on and so forth, right? I mean, setting up board meetings or setting up meetings at 9 p.m., 10 p.m. may not be the best thing, right? If she has kids, I mean, it could very well be that, she's tied up, right? So just being sensitive to the fact that this notion of women do more, right? If you just start there and say, how can you be supportive to a woman founder, depending on the life stage that she's at, right? I think that's sort of a lot of it, right? And also just being more efficient. I think that's very important, right? Efficiency is sort of a superpower that women founders have, right? And women in general have this superpower around efficiency. simply because they're doing so many things. They have to be very, very efficient. So maybe you don't need that 5-hour board meeting. Maybe you can have a 1-hour board meeting because they have a lot of things to do, right? So I think it's more on the supportive side, etc. That I think we need to be much more as a collectively as an ecosystem. We need to be much more sensitive.
Got it. I know these are things that have come actually very naturally to you. I've had a chance to, every time we have this women founders group on WhatsApp. I think you're probably one of the most sort of revered upon sort of supporters in that group overall that gets talked about. So I know these things come naturally to you. But as you zoom out from there and think about the startup ecosystem as a whole, where do you think we are when it comes to, equality and opportunity and equity? Have we achieved enough depths when it comes to the number of women entrepreneurs? Have we made progress? How far do you think we have to go? Like, what are your thoughts about the overall ecosystem?
No, I think it's a good question. Look, so I think the way I look at this, Prukalpa, is we have started the journey, right? But this is a very long journey, and we have just started, right? So I think we have just started. I do think collectively as an ecosystem, we do have the right intent, and we're making small steps, right? But we have a very, very long way to go. And so the way I sort of look at this is, look, it's both. There are 3 parts to, maybe 4 parts to this stool, right? There are founders, having more women founders starting up companies, right? Then there's the investor ecosystem, right? Having more women in investing firms, and I want to talk about that, right? The third pillar of this is having more women who are sort of mentors, right? Who can actually work with these companies to help them build out their companies, right? And then there's fourth, which is the family ecosystems, right? So if you look at this notion of women just do more, right? The family has to be very supportive, because now you're essentially trying to get what would normally take 18, 19 hours a day, right? Which is what it takes to build an early stage company, as you know, Prukalpa. Try to get it done in like 12 or 13 hours, right? And that requires a lot of support from your family sort of ecosystem, right? So there are 4 legs to this sort of stool, right? And I think in each of these areas, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go, right? So if you look at, for instance, women founders, right, at seed stage, I think that's a good indicator of what's happening now, right? So if you look at the cohort that you were in at Surge, Prukalpa, a third of our companies were, had women co-founders, right? So we are running at Surge, I think between 20 and 30% of our cohorts have women co-founders, right? We would love to see this number be much, much higher, right? And that's sort of one interesting way. Obviously Surge is only one of many, many programs that we have, but for funds and programs that we have in India. But that's sort of one indicator, right? So you can look at how many women are starting up, number one. Number two, how many women are sort of raising funding, right? So for instance, Shanti, who's the founder of, again, single founder of Let's Venture, right? Let's Venture is by far the largest crowdfunding platform in India, superpower of seed fundraising, right? They do like 10 seed investments a month. Actually, I haven't asked her, but I should ask her how many, what percentage of these companies are led by women. So one is, that's one part of it. And I'll come back and talk about maybe what we could do differently or more of, right? To have more women like Prukalpa, like you and Tamanna and Sairi and Suchita and all of these other incredible founders, right? So second would be, by the way, on that point, we haven't really talked about this, but at Sequoia, not beyond Surge, right? At Sequoia, which is across all stages of investing that we do, seed, Series A, B, C, growth, we have 37 women founders in our portfolio, right? Which is north of 20% of all of Sequoia India, and this is Sequoia Capital India, right? I'm talking about this region. So 37, and what's very interesting and what a lot of people don't realize is actually many of these women are building extraordinary enterprise software companies, right? Like you guys are building Atlan, Tamanna is building Conversite. You look at a company like View.ai and many others, right? Are being like Hyundai, it's not India, but you look at Insider, which is going to be, which is an amazing company. Yesterday, she was doing a session at SaaStr, right? On landing big deals, right? And so that's sort of another interesting indicator. The second part of this pillar is really investment firms, right? And I think here we have work to do as an ecosystem to have more women on their investing teams, right? So in our investing team, we have about six women investors, and then in our analyst pool, I think about half our analysts are actually women now. And what I'm very proud to say, Prukalpa, is 50% of the search team is actually women, right? So if you look at our search team, which is sort of investing and all the other, like for instance, our head of programming and content is woman. Actually, if half the team is women, right? So whether you look at whether it's marketing, whether it's comms, etc., or the investing team, and what's very interesting is Prachi, who joined us about 6 weeks ago from HBS, and Prachi used to be in an Indian startup before she went to business school. We've already started seeing the difference it makes when you have a woman investor, right? We are seeing more women-founded companies in the last 6 weeks than we were before, right? And it really does make a difference, right? Because I don't know whether it's just, women feel more comfortable approaching Prachi. She clearly has better networks, right, among whether it's HBS graduates or her network from women founders in Bangalore and other places, right? So I think increasing the number of women in the investing community is sort of the second stool of this, right? Which is the second pillar, if you will, of the strategy. And then you have mentors, right? So the more women you have as founders, eventually they become mentors, and that becomes very, very helpful, right? And by the way, it doesn't also have to be just women, right? It's also men who are, as you said, more aware of how important it is, and then also committed to sort of increasing it. And then finally, you have the family ecosystems. That's probably the one that maybe is hardest to sort of change, because they may or may not, so the families may or may not completely understand what it takes to build a startup. This notion of, for the first 5 years, it's 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's the kind of commitment that it takes, right? So long answer to your question, Prukalpa, but that's sort of how I think about what it would take, where we are today, which is we've started the journey. We're very, very early. We've got a long way to go, and we've got to systematically address, I think, these different aspects of our ecosystem.
That brings me to a follow-up question on that, which is a little bit more about women leadership than women entrepreneurship, right? Because a lot of these things actually will, in some ways, it's about the maturity of the ecosystem, right? Hopefully you have more women founders in the, who are starting companies. Hopefully they go on to build bigger companies and become great leaders. They come back to be mentors. Like, that's how ecosystems grow and mature. As you think about women leadership, and you've seen this perspective in both larger companies like Google, and then you've also seen this with startups and smaller companies, what is your take on leadership and how that's different in these two different settings? And are there things you think we should be doing in an ecosystem to nurture women leadership, help them build those billion-dollar companies, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. I think there's, in terms of what we should do differently, we talked about having more women startup. We talked about having more women investors, right? But I do think, it's both about leadership, but also role models, right? Today, if you look at India, we have 34 unicorns. One of them is founded by women, right? Nika, Falguni. So that's not right. We need to have many more sort of large companies, right? Founded by women, right? So I do think, making sure that, let's say by 2025, that number, instead of 1, if it becomes 10, that's good, right? Because we'll go from 1 out of 34 to 10 out of 100. Because by 2025, India will have $1 billion, 100 unicorns, and we need at least 10, right? So that's 10%, and then maybe by 2030, that becomes 25%, right? And then now we're in the race, right? My view is once you get above 20%, you start moving the needle. But until then, you've got a long way to go. So I think it's very important that we, support, and maybe, I think we need to, as an ecosystem, do more of this, which is, select sort of 100 or so women-led startups, right? And see what can we do above and beyond, almost like cross-cutting different venture capital firms as an ecosystem to really go all out to support those companies to help them accelerate, right? And whether it's mentoring, whether it's capital, whether it's access to networks, to talent, to customers, whatever it takes, right? So I do think that's going to be very, very important. I think if we can do that, see what happened is, the analogy that I use is, if you go back 10 years ago, right, when Sachin and Bini started Flipkart, the top top IIT graduates, they all wanted to work for, number one, they all wanted to leave India, and number two, they all wanted to go work for Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc. Right? Today, the top 1% of the IITians do not want to work for anybody. Right? Now, maybe they should work for somebody for some short period of time so that they actually know what they're doing before they go start their companies, but they don't want to work for anybody, right? And what actually changed there was, our first generation of young, massively successful startup founders, right? So, by 2015, the top 1% of IIT graduates, they wanted to be Bini and Sachin, right? And they wanted to go out and build the next Flipkart. And I have so many stories of this at Google when we were trying to recruit the top 1% from the top schools in India, right? So you also want to and sort of draw the analogy to my daughter, right? Because she's growing up in this household, and you said this as well, Prukalpa, right? Which is, you're a mom who was an entrepreneur, and then you were very clear very early in your life that, look, that's what I want to do. And so having more role models, I think, is really, really important. So that's the first thing we should do before it comes to leadership, because they will, and to become sort of go from 50 million valuation to $1 billion valuation, right? Obviously, you need to become better leaders, but there's so many other things that need to come into place, right? And then talking about leadership between sort of corporates and startups, it is different on the one hand, because I think in corporates at least now there's lots of companies still don't have enough representation, right? Diversity. But if I go back to my Google India leadership team, right, we were 50-50, right? So some extraordinary women like Sapna, who was our CMO, Meenu, who ran PR, Gitanjali, who was our head of legal. I think 50% of our sales leadership, Vikas and Nitin led sales, but 50% of their directs were women. Roma, Mega, all of these extraordinary women, right? Who which is great, right? So I think there are more women in corporates now, and I think what's happening in corporates though is that they tend to go to companies that are more that value diversity and inclusion, right? It's sort of an interesting thing, right? So if you become really good at something, you start sort of attracting people who are attracted by that, right? So whereas in startups, I think we don't have as many numbers, so we need to both increase the funnel, meaning top of the funnel, where new founders starting up, and then, as you said, we need to provide a lot more support, across all dimensions to our founders who are still at the early stages, and help them scale up their companies. So focusing on leadership development. In fact, we at Sequoia, we have this program called Sequoia Spark, right, which was launched about 2 years ago, where now we have about 250 startup founders who are part of Spark, where we try to provide mentorship and access to knowledge, access to networks, access to huge focus on company building and so on and so forth. So, as an ecosystem, I think we need to do a lot more of that. In fact, at Sequoia, we're working on, how can we really take Spark and make it much, much more impactful.
Got it. So going from there to one last wish and dream. Assuming we were looking back at this interview 5 years from now, what are the 3 tangible things that you wish you would want to see in the startup ecosystem by then?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to, I think we should have many more large Indian startups that have women co-founders, women CEOs. By the way, I take that back. Divya, who's the co-founder of Byju's, right, is and we should, again, right, that's the other thing that we should do, is we should celebrate more women. Women co-founders, right? So I think one, just having more companies that have women co-founder CEOs, women single founder CEOs, women co-founders in general, right? I think that's the first thing, right? So as I said, maybe the number today is 2. We should actually get that number. In fact, ETPrime, we should get that, please. How many of India's 34 unicorns have a women co-founder in them, right? I'm hoping that it's more than 2. But certainly the CEO, I mean, I think it's just Palguni, right, who at Nykaa. So that's the first thing. I'd love to see more of them. I said, we should probably aim for a 10x. If the number is 1, maybe we should get to 10. If the number is 2, we should get to 20. I think that's the first. I think second, look, it'd be great to see, how can we get, let's say at the seed funding level, maybe get to about 30 to 40% as an ecosystem. I do think Surge probably has a higher percentage of women co-founders than the general seed ecosystem. But that again is sort of data, right? I mean, come to think of it, I think we need to get much better data on what's going on, with women women co-founders and diversity. So I'd say that's the second thing, right? Having more, maybe 30, 40%. Let's say if the number is 15 or 20%, can we double that by 2025? So that's number two. I think the third one is, I'd love to see actually the media, since this is an ETPrime event, right? Literally 100x the focus on women entrepreneurship, right? Because I tell you, it makes such a huge difference, right? Because if you're a kid like Maya, who's our daughter who's 14, right? But you aren't growing up surrounded by entrepreneurship like the way she is with her mom, and me being on Zoom talking to entrepreneurs. It's important. How do they get inspired, right? And they get inspired by hearing about it, right? By not just on sort of online news, but everywhere, right? Whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on so I'd say that's the third thing, right? If we can 100x let's call it the 100x the awareness on women entrepreneurship. And I do think, by the way, this is not talking about startups in the context that we're talking about. But India, we'll have 100 million new Indians that will enter the workforce over the next 10 years. And there's really no way for us to create enough jobs for those folks, right? A large number of them will have to become entrepreneurs. And I actually think India needs to have 50 million self-employed entrepreneurs. That's not building a startup the way you are, Prukalpa, but women who can be self-empowered, right? They start doing business from their homes, and whether it's making products and selling, whether it's being a reseller, whether it's cooking food, whether it's doing whatever, or whether it's programming, right? India has 20 million freelancers today. Interesting question, right? How many of them are women? I don't know. So we should do that. So I'd say those would be the three things those would be three very tangible things that I'd love to see by over the next 5 years. But I think the only other thing I would say, Prukalpa, is I don't sort of view these things as 3, 4, 5 years. I think this is a 20, 30-year journey, and I hope that by over the next 15, 20 years, it really is 50-50 on everything.
Got it. Big dreams, and we'll mark the date, and hopefully we'll revisit it 5 years from now and see where we've gotten as an ecosystem. Thank you so much for taking our time for this chat, Rajan. Thanks ETPrime for allowing us to do this, and I hope this actually helps the community get to where we want to get to. And there's a lot of work we have to do, so we're going to run back to do that now.
Terrific. Thank you, Prukalpa, for hosting this, and thanks ETPrime for having us.